Welcome everyone to this online lecture. This is the last chapter of the semester, so pretty excited about that. Chapter 18. What we're going to be talking about is the change in populations over time. So what we're going to be looking at is kind of building off what we've already know about genes and how genes are passed on from offspring to offspring within a certain population, and that creates variation within population. So that's what we're going to be looking at now. Um, and some key questions for this section is: how is evolution defined in genetic terms? What is the source of genetic variation? And what determines the number of phenotypes for a given trait? So some of this is going to be a review for us, and it should go fairly quickly here for those certain concepts, but majority of this will be somewhat new to you. Vocabulary for this section: gene pool, allele frequency, single gene trait, and polygenic trait. So these are some words that you've already seen within this semester already. Okay, so genetics within populations is what we're going to be looking at. And genetics just claims a few things that we need to kind of rehash a little bit. And this is really the basics of this section is how genetics plays a role within these populations. So stuff that we have already talked about, heritable traits are controlled by genes carried on chromosomes. We all know that. We've dealt with chromosomes. We've looked at a lot with chromosomes during the meiosis process. And we know that these genes that we inherit are within these chromosomes, and they're coded within the DNA. Changes in genes and chromosomes generate variation. So if you look at a certain population, just look at your class around you and look at hair color, there's a wide variety of different hair colors within this class. If you look at eye color, um, freckles, non-freckles, whatever it might be, there's a lot of variation within populations. Okay, the human population's got a huge variation within it. Look at the height of people in your class. That's what we're going to be looking at today is this variation within population and what causes variation and maybe how this variation could change over time. These claims help scientists hypothesize about variation and selection within population and how they can change over time. So what we'll be looking at is how we select maybe a trait is selected for within a certain population. Therefore, that trait would probably be passed on more frequently than other traits are. So we're going to be looking at how selection plays a role in populations and how that might change things over a long period of time. All right, so what is a population? That's our new word for today is populations. A population is a group of individuals of the same species that mate and produce offspring. So like I've already said, we have the human population, we can have the deer population, the raccoon population, the butterfly population, whatever it might be. They're the same species in a certain area that mate and create offspring. So this creates interbreeding occurs within these populations and not between different populations. So all the breeding process is dealing with one population of species within that certain area. Okay, and there can be different populations in the surrounding area, but this group of individuals is probably within this same population of the same species. So going on, we'll talk about a gene pool. So within a certain population, interbreed with one another, they share common groups of genes called the gene pool. So we have, certain genes, and all the genes that are out there is called the gene pool. So we can pluck out, different traits out there, and we, could get that trait. Um, this happens within, a certain individual. We have certain genes, we have a gene pool, but what we're looking at is all the population's genes. And that's a huge amount of genes that we're looking at. Gene pool consists of all the genes present in a population, including all alleles of each gene. So we'll get to that here in a little bit. But this is looking at every gene, every allele that a population has. So there's a wide variety of genes out there that we can look at. So scientists describe gene pools by the numbers of different alleles they contain. So obviously alleles code for different genes, differences in genes. So we could have like blue eyes, brown eyes, green eyes. We could have purple flowers or white flowers. We could have tall plants or short plants. Those are alleles that code for certain genes. So the number of times an allele occurs in a gene pool is called allele frequency. Okay, so if we have, let's say, tall plants, okay, that occurs more often than short plants, we can say that we have a higher percentage of tall alleles, or tall has a higher allele frequency than short alleles. Short alleles would have a lower number of allele frequency. Allele frequency is always given as a percentage, not the total outcome. And like I was talking about tall and short, based off of Mendel's experiments that we've already talked about, we know that tall is dominant over short. But the allele frequency doesn't really necessarily tell you if it is dominant or not. So it's either dominant or recessive. The allele frequency does not tell you that. It could be the recessive is more common than the dominant. Okay, you never know, and this is going to be an example of that. And we'll get to that here in a little bit. So go into this little diagram here. This looks like a sample of mice color within a population. And what we can see here is that we have 36% of them are homozygous brown. So let's say this is the recessive trait here. So this would be little b's, little b, and we have 16% that are homozygous black, which would be big B, big B. We know that black's dominant because if we have a heterozygous individual, we're going to see a black mouse. So therefore, we know that black is the dominant gene and brown is the recessive allele. All right, so if we look at this, within this population, we see that 36% are homozygous brown and 48% are heterozygous black. So what's the allele frequency of that brown allele? Well, there's 48% that are heterozygous. So if we cut that percentage in half of those alleles will be that brown allele. So half of 48 is 24, and we know that all of these are brown. So if we take 24 from here and 36% from here, we're going to get 60% of the alleles within this population will be for brown. And that means that we have 24 black over here and 16% here. We have 30% alleles for black rats or black mice. So in this case, the recessive allele is actually more common, or the allele frequency is higher than the black allele, which is kind of interesting. So over time, we could maybe make some predictions over this that 60% is brown, so maybe brown would be more apt to be passed on within this population, and we could possibly see this number increase. Or we could see that there is 48% heterozygous, and if a lot of these mice reproduce with the brown mice, okay, we could get some more blacks in there. So this could variance. It could go either way, and that's what we're looking at here. So how populations could change over time which is called evolution. Evolution is just the term that means changing over time, and what we're looking at now is population change over time. So evolution involves any change of allele frequency in a population over time. It doesn't mean we're changing species here or anything like that. It just means that we're seeing change between mice coat color. So this isn't meaning that we're changing species or anything like that. We're just looking at changes within a certain population that we can actually document and see, and we can test and experiment with. So to be more specific here, we're talking about macroevolution, which is just talking about population change over time. And we're actually going to talk about how, we have changed over time based off of height. So height has actually changed in humans over time, and we're actually going to talk about that here in a little bit. Okay, so phenotype and natural selection. So natural selection is a big factor of population change. That's what we're going to be looking at now. In any population, some individuals have phenotypes that are better suited for their environment than the phenotypes of other individuals. And this leads to a higher fitness and more offspring to be passed on and make more copies of their genes to the next generation. And this is what natural selection is all about. It's the easy, terminology for it. The definition of it is survival of the fittest. So the fittest will survive. The one that is best colored, best suited for the environment will produce offspring. Just put this little graphic over here. You can see that these caterpillars are here with some birds around it. Okay, maybe this codes for, caterpillar color. This allele does, and this allele codes for green and yellow, and this codes for darker colors, yellow and brown. And which one on a branch sticks out more? Okay, we see that the green one sticks out more. So this one's probably not suited for this environment, and this will probably get picked off and not pass its genetics off to offspring. It'll probably be killed before that. Where these are very suited for this environment, and they're probably more likely to pass on their genes. And that's all we're talking about here is natural selection, survival of the fittest, best suited for the environment. Okay, let's take this scenario and change it, and let's put these caterpillars in grass. All right, which one would be exposed then? Probably these brown ones here, and the green one would be more suited for those environments. So it's all about the environment that you're in and the species that's trying to hunt you also, and what their site is like. So that's what we're going to be looking at now is natural selection. And how do we get variation within a population? Is that what we're talking about now is just variation within population, differences within the population. So genetic variation is produced in three main ways. Mutations, genetic recombination during sexual reproduction, and lateral gene transfer. These mechanisms all create diversity within populations. Without diversity, we would all look the same. You would look like your mom, you'd look like your dad, which would be kind of weird. But if we didn't have genetic recombination, that would happen. And mutations are pretty neat too. They're just kind of unique characteristics that could be beneficial to you or not beneficial to you. So that's what the three things that we're going to be talking about now with genetic variations, differences of species within a certain population. So I'm going to stop this video now. We're going to talk about these three things in the next video.